"I am the law," screamed the officer, tightening the cuffs until the elderly man winced. He thought he was taking down a shoplifter. He thought he was cleaning up the streets. But Officer Kyle O'Connor didn't know that the man in his back seat wasn't just a shopper. He was the man who wrote the very laws O'Connor was sworn to uphold. This is the story of how one arrogant mistake, one act of racial profiling, spiraled into a $1.3 million nightmare for the city of Chicago and destroyed a corrupt cop's life forever. You think you know justice? Wait until you see the gavel drop on this one. The Sunday morning air in the Gold Coast district of Chicago was usually crisp, smelling faintly of Lake Michigan and expensive coffee. For the Honorable Samuel T. Washington, aged 74, it was the only time of the week the world felt truly orderly. Samuel was a man of precise habits. He had spent 40 years on the bench, 15 of them as a presiding judge for the Cook County Circuit Court. He was a man who had stared down mob bosses, serial killers, and corrupt politicians from his high seat, his face a mask of impenetrable stone. But on Sundays, he wasn't Your Honor. He was just Samuel, a grandfather who wanted to make his famous pecan pie for Sunday dinner. He adjusted the collar of his vintage trench coat, a Burberry piece he'd bought in London in 1998, and checked his reflection in the window of Whitmore's gourmet market. He looked every bit the distinguished gentleman he was, silver hair cropped close, a posture that defied his age, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He grabbed a shopping cart. The wheels glided silently across the polished concrete floor. Whitmore's was the kind of place where apples were polished individually, and the cheese counter had a dedicated sommelier. It was quiet, respectful, or at least it usually was. As Samuel moved toward the produce section, inspecting the firmness of the organic peaches, he didn't notice the patrol car idling near the entrance. He didn't see the young officer inside, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, looking for something, anything, to break the monotony of a slow shift. Officer Kyle O'Connor was 26 years old, 3 years into the force, and already carrying a reputation. In the locker room, they called him the Bulldog. On the streets, the residents called him a menace. He was the type of cop who saw threats in shadows and disrespect in silence. He had transferred to the Gold Coast precinct 2 months ago after a use of force complaint in the South Side that the union had quietly buried. He was itching for a bust that would prove he belonged in this high-end district. Inside the store, Samuel picked up a carton of specialized almond milk. It was $7. He placed it in his cart. He moved to the bakery, selecting a fresh sourdough loaf. He placed it in his cart. He was halfway down the spice aisle, searching for a specific brand of Madagascar vanilla extract, when he felt eyes on him. It wasn't the store staff. Brenda Higgins, the store manager, knew Samuel well. She was currently at the front register, handling a return for a woman in a fur coat who was complaining about the acidity of her Chardonnay. No. The eyes watching Samuel were colder. Samuel turned his head slightly. Standing at the end of the aisle, arms crossed over a tactical vest that looked too bulky for a grocery run, was Officer O'Connor. The officer wasn't shopping. He was watching. Samuel paused. He had been a black man in America for 7 decades. He knew the texture of this gaze. It was a physical weight. But Samuel was also a judge. He knew his rights better than he knew the lyrics to his favorite hymn. He decided to ignore the young man. He found the vanilla extract, a small bottle costing nearly $30, and placed it gently in the child seat of the cart so it wouldn't get crushed. He turned his cart to exit the aisle. O'Connor didn't move. The officer stood dead center, blocking the path. "Excuse me, officer," Samuel said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that had silenced courtrooms for years. O'Connor didn't step aside. He chewed his gum aggressively. "You doing some shopping? Pop." "I am," Samuel said, his face impassive. "If you'll excuse me." "That's some expensive vanilla," O'Connor said, nodding toward the cart. $30 for a bottle that size. "Quality usually comes at a premium," Samuel replied, pushing his cart forward, expecting the officer to yield. O'Connor took a half step back, just enough to let Samuel pass. But as he did, he leaned in. "Make sure you pay for that. We've had a lot of drift in this neighborhood lately." Samuel stopped. The wheels of his cart halted. He turned slowly to face the officer. The air in the aisle seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Young man," Samuel said, and the authority in his voice was like a whip crack. "I have lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. I have shopped at this store since before you were in high school. I suggest you find actual crime to police, rather than harassing citizens over baking supplies." O'Connor's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. He wasn't used to being talked down to. He was used to fear. He was used to, "Yes, sir," and "Sorry, officer." He wasn't used to the steel in Samuel's eyes. "I can ask whatever questions I want," O'Connor snapped, his hand drifting instinctively toward his belt. "It's my job to prevent theft. You fit the description of a suspect we're looking for." It was a lie, a lazy, clumsy lie. Samuel knew it. "And what description is that?" Samuel asked. "An elderly man buying sourdough. Watch your mouth." O'Connor stepped closer, invading Samuel's personal space. "Or I'll give you a reason to shut it." Samuel held the officer's gaze for 3 long seconds. Then he shook his head, a gesture of profound disappointment, and turned away. He pushed his cart toward the checkout. O'Connor stood there, vibrating with rage. He keyed his radio, though he didn't speak into it. He just needed to feel the weight of his power. He wasn't going to let the old man walk away with the last word. Samuel reached the counter. Brenda Higgins smiled at him. "Good morning. Judge Washington pecan pie today." "Indeed, Brenda," Samuel smiled, the mask lifting. "If the grandkids leave any for me." O'Connor, lurking by the magazine rack, was too far away to hear the title judge. All he saw was the familiarity, the comfort, and in his twisted logic, he saw something else. He saw Samuel reach into his deep trench coat pocket to retrieve his wallet. But as Samuel did, he shifted the vanilla bottle from the child seat to the main basket to make room for his reusable bag. To O'Connor's eyes, looking for a crime to justify his anger, it looked like a sleight of hand. It looked like concealment. "Gotcha," O'Connor whispered. Samuel paid. The total was $84.50. He tapped his platinum Amex card, took the receipt, and began to bag his own groceries. As he preferred, he was meticulous. Heavy items on the bottom, bread on top. He walked toward the automatic sliding doors, carrying 2 brown paper bags. The rain outside had picked up. He paused in the vestibule to button his coat. "Hold it right there." The shout was loud enough to make the cashier jump. Samuel sighed. He didn't turn around immediately. He finished buttoning the top button. "I said stop." A hand clamped onto Samuel's shoulder. It wasn't a request. It was a strike. O'Connor spun the 74-year-old man around with enough force that the bag of groceries in his left hand swung wildly, the sourdough bread tumbling out onto the wet floor mat. Samuel stumbled, but caught his balance. His eyes blazed. Officer, remove your hand from my person immediately. You're not going anywhere, O'Connor barked. He was making a scene now. Shoppers were stopping. Phones were coming out. This was O'Connor's stage. I saw you. You saw me buy groceries, Samuel said, his voice rising, clear and articulate. Now look at what you've done. You've ruined my bread. Forget the bread I saw you pocket that vanilla extract, O'Connor shouted, pointing a finger in Samuel's face. You moved it from the seat to your pocket. I saw the move. Slick hands. Pop. But not slick enough. Samuel stared at him, genuinely baffled by the incompetence. The vanilla is in the bag you are currently causing me to drop. Liar. O'Connor grabbed the bag from Samuel's right hand. The bag ripped. The contents spilled out. The almond milk hit the floor with a thud. The peaches rolled across the dirty mat, and there, rolling quietly to a stop against the metal door frame, was the bottle of Madagascar vanilla extract. The lobby went silent. Samuel looked at the bottle, then back at the officer. There it is, as I said. For a rational person, this would be the moment of apology. The moment to say, my mistake, sir. Help pick up the groceries, and retreat. But Kyle O'Connor was not in a rational state. He was in an ego state. He had just accused a man of theft in front of a dozen people with smartphones, destroyed his groceries, and been proven wrong instantly. The shame was hot and prickly on his neck. He couldn't be wrong. If he was wrong, he was weak. He had to be right about something. You threw it there, O'Connor stammered, his logic fracturing. You tried to ditch the evidence when I stopped you. I paid for it, Samuel roared, his patience finally snapping. Brenda, bring the receipt. Brenda Higgins was rushing over from the counter, waving a slip of paper. Officer, stop. He paid for everything I have, the receipt right here. O'Connor looked at Brenda, then back at Samuel. He was losing control of the narrative. He needed to regain dominance. Step back, ma'am, O'Connor yelled, putting his hand on his taser. This is an active investigation. Active investigation, Samuel scoffed. It's a shopping trip, you imbecile. Look at the receipt. The word imbecile was the match in the powder keg. That's it, O'Connor snapped. Disorderly conduct. Resisting a lawful order. Put your hands behind your back. You have got to be kidding me, Samuel said, standing his ground. I am not putting my hands anywhere. You are going to call your supervisor, Sergeant Miller, right now. I know he's on duty at the 18th District. O'Connor froze. How do you know Miller? I signed the warrant for the drug bust he conducted last Tuesday, Samuel said coldly. Now call him. O'Connor's brain short-circuited. He didn't hear judge. He heard a suspect name dropping to get out of trouble. It was a common tactic. Oh, I know the sergeant. I know the chief. It was always a lie. I don't care who you think you know, O'Connor growled. He grabbed Samuel's wrist and twisted it behind his back with a practiced, brutal motion designed to inflict maximum pain. Samuel gasped. The pain in his rotator cuff was sharp and blinding. He was an old man. His joints weren't what they used to be. I am a judge of the circuit court, Samuel shouted, the pain making his voice strain. You are making the biggest mistake of your life. Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England. O'Connor sneered. He kicked Samuel's legs apart. Stop resisting, stop resisting. He wasn't resisting. Samuel was trying to keep his balance so he didn't break a hip on the wet tile. O'Connor slammed the second cuff onto Samuel's wrist. The metal bit into the skin. You're under arrest for shoplifting, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest, O'Connor announced, breathless, adrenaline flooding his system. He yanked Samuel toward the door. "My groceries," Samuel whispered, looking back at the ruined peaches and the trampled bread. "They're evidence now," O'Connor said. He marched Judge Samuel Washington out into the rain. The gathered crowd was silent, phones recording every second. Brenda Higgins stood in the doorway, mouth agape, holding the receipt that proved Samuel's innocence. As O'Connor shoved Samuel against the hood of the cruiser, the exact moment from our opening hook, Samuel stopped struggling. He took a deep breath. The pain in his shoulder was throbbing, but his mind was clearing. The anger was condensing into something colder, sharper. He turned his head as best he could against the cold metal of the car hood. "Officer," Samuel said softly, "what is your badge number?" 4922. O'Connor spat. "Remember it." "Oh." Samuel closed his eyes. "I will. And so will the jury." The back of a police cruiser is designed to strip a person of their humanity. It is a hard, plastic shell, smelling of stale sweat, industrial cleaner, and old fear. For Judge Samuel Washington, accustomed to the mahogany chairs of the appellate court and the plush leather of his personal study, the sensory assault was immediate. His hands were still cuffed behind his back, the metal biting into his wrists with every pothole Officer O'Connor hit, and O'Connor seemed to be hitting them on purpose. The young officer was driving with a reckless swagger, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping a rhythm on the dashboard. He was high on adrenaline, the specific, intoxicating rush of a predator who believes he has successfully hunted. "You comfortable back there?" "Your Honor," O'Connor sneered, glancing at the rearview mirror. He emphasized the title with a thick layer of sarcasm. "Or should I turn on the heated seats for you?" Samuel didn't answer. He sat perfectly still, despite the pain radiating from his shoulder. He was doing what he had done for 40 years. He was building a case. Every jolt of the car, every taunt, every procedural failure was being filed away in his steel trap mind. Failure to secure seatbelt for detainee, Samuel noted silently. Unnecessary roughness in transport, continued verbal harassment. Quiet type. Huh. O'Connor laughed. "That's good. You'll have plenty of time to be quiet in the holding cell. Maybe you can think about how to pay for that vanilla extract." "I have the receipt," Samuel said calmly, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. "As did the store manager. You refused to look at it." "I don't look at fake receipts cooked up by your friends," O'Connor shot back. "I trust my eyes, and my eyes saw a thief." They pulled into the Sally Port of the 18th District Station. The garage door rumbled shut behind them, sealing out the daylight. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow pallor over everything. O'Connor hauled Samuel out of the car. He didn't guide him, he yanked him. Samuel stumbled, his dress shoes slipping on the smooth concrete, but he caught himself. He stood tall, smoothing the front of his trench coat as best he could, with his hands bound. "Move!" O'Connor shoved him toward the heavy steel door. Inside, the station was a hive of controlled chaos. Phones were ringing, radios were squawking, and officers were moving with the weary efficiency of a Sunday shift. The air smelled of burnt coffee and floor wax. O'Connor paraded Samuel through the bullpen like a trophy. "Got a live one," he announced to no one in particular. "Shoplifter, resisting, and get this, impersonating a public official." A few officers looked up from their paperwork. Most just ignored him. O'Connor was known for his mouth. He brought Samuel to the booking desk. The desk sergeant, a weary veteran named Thomas Kowalski, looked up over his reading glasses. Kowalski had been on the force for 30 years. He had seen everything, and he had very little patience for rookies like O'Connor. "What you got, O'Connor?" Kowalski asked, his voice gravelly. "Retail theft at Whitmore's," O'Connor said, slamming the paperwork onto the high counter. "Old guy thought he could swipe $30 worth of vanilla. Then he tried to fight me." Kowalski looked at Samuel. He saw the Burberry coat. He saw the silk scarf. He saw the expensive haircut. And he saw the eyes calm, intelligent, and utterly unafraid. "He fought you?" Kowalski asked skeptically. "He looks like he's 70. 74, Samuel corrected gently. "He's spry," O'Connor insisted. "Twisted away, tried to run, had to restrain him." "Name?" Kowalski asked, poising his pen over the logbook. "Samuel Washington," O'Connor said. Kowalski paused. The pen hovered. "Samuel Washington." "That's what he said," O'Connor shrugged. "Probably a fake name, too." "It is my name," Samuel said, "and I would like to make my phone call now. I need to call my attorney, or perhaps the superintendent. I believe he is having lunch with the mayor today." O'Connor let out a bark of laughter. "Hear that? Kowalski. He knows the superintendent. He knows the mayor. This guy is a riot. Put him in the system." Kowalski narrowed his eyes. He looked at Samuel again. There was something familiar about the face, something he couldn't quite place. But the Sunday shift was busy, and he didn't have time to solve puzzles. "Empty your pockets," Kowalski sighed. O'Connor uncuffed one of Samuel's hands so he could comply. Samuel reached into his pockets. He placed his wallet on the counter, then his keys, then a monogrammed handkerchief. "Belt and shoelaces," O'Connor ordered. This was the ultimate indignity. To strip a man of the things that held his appearance together was to strip him of his armor. Samuel slowly unbuckled his leather belt. It was Italian calfskin. He coiled it neatly and placed it on the counter. He bent down, wincing as his knees protested, and untied his Oxfords. He stood up, holding his pants up with one hand. He looked small now, vulnerable. "Fingerprints," O'Connor said, grabbing Samuel's hand and pressing it onto the scanner. He did it with unnecessary force, mashing the delicate fingers against the glass. "Officer," Samuel said, wincing. "I have arthritis. There is no need for this pressure." "Don't tell me how to do my job," O'Connor muttered. They took the mug shot. Samuel stood against the height chart. He didn't scowl. He didn't look down. He looked straight into the lens, his expression one of tragic disappointment. It was a photo that would later be splashed across every newspaper in Chicago. "All right, Your Honor," O'Connor mocked, grabbing Samuel's arm again. "Your chambers are ready. Cell 3. He led Samuel to the holding cells in the back. The cell was a concrete box with a metal bench and a toilet in the corner. O'Connor shoved him inside and slammed the barred door. The lock clicked with a finality that echoed in Samuel's chest. "Enjoy the accommodations," O'Connor grinned through the bars. "I'll let you know when the president calls to pardon you." He turned and walked away, whistling. Samuel sat on the cold metal bench. He didn't slump. He sat with his back straight, hands folded in his lap. He closed his eyes and began to recite the Illinois Criminal Code in his head, section by section, calming his mind, preparing for war. 20 minutes later, the station's heavy double doors swung open. Sergeant Miller walked in, shaking rain off his umbrella. Miller was a good cop, a solid leader who was trying to clean up the precinct's reputation. He was tired, wet, and looking forward to a quiet afternoon of paperwork. He walked past the booking desk. "Quiet out there, Kowalski." "Mostly," Kowalski grunted. O'Connor brought in a shoplifter, Usual drama. Miller rolled his eyes. O'Connor, that kid is going to give me an ulcer. What did he bring in a teenager stealing candy? Nah, some old guy from the Gold Coast. Claimed he was a judge. Miller stopped. He turned slowly. He claimed what? Said he was a judge, Kowalski said, not looking up. Said he knew the superintendent. O'Connor laughed it off. Booked him for retail theft and resisting. A cold feeling started in the pit of Miller's stomach. What was the name? Washington. Kowalski checked the log. Samuel Washington. Miller dropped his umbrella. It hit the floor with a clatter that made the room go silent. Samuel. Washington. Miller whispered. Yeah. Why? Miller didn't answer. He ran around the desk, shoving Kowalski out of the way to look at the computer screen. He pulled up the booking photo that had just been taken. There he was, the silver hair, the piercing eyes, the face that hung in a portrait in the lobby of the very courthouse where Miller testified every week. Oh my God, Miller breathed. Oh my God. Sarge. Kowalski looked worried. You know him. Know him. Miller's voice rose to a shout. That is the presiding judge of the 2nd District. That is Samuel T. Washington. He's the most senior judge in Cook County. He's... Where is O'Connor? Break room, Kowalski pointed, his face draining of color. Miller stormed across the bullpen. He kicked the door to the break room open. Officer O'Connor was sitting at a table, feet up on a chair, eating a donut and laughing at something on his phone. He looked up, startled. Hey, Sarge. You're back. You missed the show. I just took down this. Shut up. Miller roared. The vein in his neck was bulging. Get your feet off that chair and stand up. O'Connor scrambled to his feet, dropping the donut. Sarge, what's wrong? You arrested Samuel Washington. Miller stepped into O'Connor's space, radiating fury. Yeah, the shoplifter, the guy who said he was a judge. He's crazy. Sarge, total nut job. He is a judge, you moron, Miller screamed. He's the judge. He's the man who signs half the warrants in this city. He's the man who put away the Giancana crew. He's a legal legend. O'Connor blinked. The smile vanished. What, no? No way. He was just some old guy in a trench coat. He stole vanilla. Did you check the receipt? Miller demanded. Well, no. But I saw. Did you check the receipt? The manager tried to show me, but I knew she was covering for him. So Miller put his hands on his head and paced a tight circle. You arrested a presiding judge for shoplifting, refused to check the evidence that proved his innocence, and you booked him. Did you rough him up? Tell me you didn't touch him. O'Connor swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. He resisted. I had to subdue him, put him on the hood. Miller stopped pacing. He looked at O'Connor with a mixture of pity and disgust. You put Judge Washington on the hood of a car. I didn't know. O'Connor's voice cracked. He just looked like a suspect. He looked like a black man. Miller said quietly. That's what you mean. You saw a black man in a nice coat, and you decided he was a thief. I'm not. Give me the keys to the cell, Miller demanded, holding out his hand. Sarge, if he really is a judge, maybe we can just talk to him, explain it was a mistake. O'Connor was pleading now, the reality of his situation crashing down on him. There is no explaining this. Miller snatched the keys. You are done. O'Connor, sit here. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't even breathe until I come back. Miller ran back to the holding area. He unlocked the heavy door to cell 3. Samuel Washington was still sitting on the bench. He looked up as the door opened. His expression was serene. Terrifyingly so. "Sergeant Miller," Samuel said politely, "I believe I mentioned to your officer that I knew you were on duty." Miller felt like throwing up. "Your Honor, Judge Washington, I am so incredibly sorry. I just found out. This is a catastrophic mistake." "A mistake implies an accident, Sergeant," Samuel said, standing up slowly. He rubbed his wrists where the red marks from the cuffs were turning into bruises. This was not an accident. This was a choice, a series of choices made by Officer O'Connor. "I know, sir. I know. Please, come out." Miller held the door open. Bowing slightly, Samuel stepped out of the cell. "I would like my belt and my shoelaces, Sergeant. And then I would like to use your phone. I have a call to make." "Of course. Anything. My office is yours." As they walked back to the booking desk, the station was dead silent. Every officer was standing, watching. They all knew now. The word had spread like wildfire. They were watching a walking lawsuit. They were watching the end of careers. O'Connor was standing in the doorway of the break room, pale as a ghost. He watched Samuel walk by. Samuel stopped. He turned to look at the young officer. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He simply adjusted his coat, which was wrinkled and dirty from the arrest. "Officer O'Connor," Samuel said. The room held its breath. "You asked me if I was comfortable," Samuel said. "You asked if you should turn on the heated seats." O'Connor trembled. "I hope you are comfortable," Samuel continued. "Because the seat you are about to sit in during the internal affairs hearing and the civil trial and the criminal inquiry, that seat is going to be very, very hot." Samuel turned back to Miller. "The phone." Sergeant War. Miller handed him the receiver with a shaking hand. Samuel dialed a number from memory. He waited 2 rings. "Hello, yes," Samuel said into the phone, his voice echoing through the silent station. "Get me the mayor, and tell him to wake up the city attorney. We have a situation." The release of Judge Samuel Washington was not a quiet affair. By the time Sergeant Miller had processed the paperwork, his hands trembling the entire time the rain outside had stopped, leaving the Chicago streets slick and reflecting the neon lights of the city, Samuel declined the offer of a ride home from the police. "I would prefer not to be in a police vehicle again today," he said, his voice raspy from the stress. Instead, he called his son, Marcus, a corporate litigator who drove a black S-Class Mercedes and had a temper that matched his father's intellect. When Marcus arrived at the 18th District, he didn't storm in screaming. He walked in with a terrifying, silent precision. He saw his father sitting on a bench in the lobby, still wearing the dirty trench coat, his left arm hanging limp at his side. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice cracking. He knelt beside the old man. "I'm all right, son," Samuel said, wincing as he tried to stand. "Help me up. My shoulder is problematic." Marcus turned to Sergeant Miller, who was standing nearby, looking like a man awaiting execution. "Who did this?" Marcus asked. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. "Officer O'Connor," Miller whispered. "He's been relieved of duty pending investigation." "Investigation?" Marcus laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "You better hope your investigation is faster than my filing speed, Sergeant, because by tomorrow morning, this department is going to be drowning in subpoenas." They left the station. As they walked out, a few photographers were already waiting. The scanners had picked up the chatter code 10 to 15 high profile, Judge Washington. The flashbulbs popped, illuminating Samuel's bruised face and the mud on his coat. By the time they reached Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the story was breaking. TMZ had the headline first: Chi-Town Justice Presiding Judge Arrested for Buying Vanilla. Then came the Chicago Tribune: Police Blunder Judge Washington, hospitalized after arrest by rookie cop. But the real bomb dropped an hour later. A teenager who had been in the parking lot of Whitmore's Gourmet Market uploaded a TikTok video. It was shaky. Vertical footage. But the audio was crystal clear. Video content, you see the frail, elderly Samuel Washington pinned against the hood. You hear O'Connor screaming, "Stop resisting," while twisting the arm of a man who is clearly not moving. You hear the snap of the handcuffs. And most damning of all, you hear O'Connor shout, "I don't care who you know." The video had 3 million views in 2 hours. Inside the hospital, Dr. Emily Chen was reviewing the x-rays. Samuel sat on the exam table, shirtless. His torso was a map of his life, a scar from a childhood surgery, the sagging skin of age. But now, overlaid on that history, were angry purple bruises on his ribs where he had been pressed against the car, and deep red lacerations on his wrists. "Your rotator cuff is torn." "Judge." "Doctor," Chen said softly. "Grade 3 tear. The supraspinatus tendon is completely detached from the bone." Samuel closed his eyes. He loved to swim. He swam 3 laps every morning at the Union League Club. It was his meditation. "Surgery," he asked, "at your age, with your history of heart arrhythmia?" "Surgery is risky." "Doctor," Chen said, "we can try physical therapy, but you may never regain full range of motion in that arm." Samuel looked at his left hand. He tried to lift it. He couldn't. It was dead weight. The anger that had been a cold knot in his stomach began to heat up. It wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was permanent physical alteration. That young man, with his arrogance and his fragility, had taken away Samuel's ability to swim. He had taken away his ability to hold his great-granddaughter without pain. "Document everything, Doctor," Samuel said. "Every bruise, every millimeter of inflammation. Take color photographs." "I will," she promised. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Officer Kyle O'Connor was sitting in his small apartment in Wrigleyville. The TV was on, muted. He was watching himself on the news. He was drinking a cheap beer, his hand shaking so hard the can rattled against his teeth. "It's out of context," he muttered to the empty room. They didn't see him reach. They didn't see the aggression. His phone buzzed. It was Mike Russo, the union representative. "Kyle," Russo's voice was tight. "Don't answer the door. Don't go on social media. Don't talk to your girlfriend. Don't talk to your mother. Mike, you gotta help me," O'Connor pleaded. "The guy set me up. He knew the sergeant. He baited me." "Kyle, shut up," Russo snapped. "You arrested Samuel T. Washington. Do you know who that is? That's the guy who wrote the opinion on State versus Reynolds. That's the guy who reformed the bail system. You didn't arrest a suspect. You arrested a monument." So he broke the law. He had a receipt. "Kyle, the manager gave a statement an hour ago. She said you refused to look at it. She said you called him Pop and Boy." "I never said boy," O'Connor lied. He couldn't remember if he did or not. The adrenaline had been a fog. "It doesn't matter," Russo sighed. "The mayor is on the phone with the police superintendent right now. They are talking about throwing you to the wolves to save the budget. The city is facing a deficit, and they can't afford a $10 million lawsuit. "They can't fire me," O'Connor said, his voice rising. "I have rights. The union protects me. The union protects cops. Kyle," Russo said darkly, "but right now, you don't look like a cop. You look like a liability. Sit tight. I'll call you in the morning." The line went dead. O'Connor looked at the TV. The Chiron on CNN read, "Excessive force. Chicago, PD under fire again." For the first time in his life, Kyle O'Connor felt the cold, creeping dread of being on the other side of the power dynamic. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the prey. It took 3 months for the lawsuit to hit the discovery phase. The city of Chicago had tried to settle immediately. They offered $250,000 nuisance value within 48 hours of the arrest. Judge Washington didn't even dignify it with a response. Then they offered $500,000. Washington's lawyer, a shark named David Sterling, who charged $900 an hour and wore suits that cost more than O'Connor's car, sent back a single-page letter. "We are not interested in your money. We are interested in the truth. We will see you in deposition." The deposition took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 45th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The view of Lake Michigan was breathtaking, but no one was looking outside. On one side of the mahogany table sat Samuel Washington. His left arm was in a complex sling. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes were as sharp as diamonds. Beside him was David Sterling, looking bored and dangerous. On the other side sat Kyle O'Connor. He looked terrible. He had gained weight. His skin was sallow. He was wearing a suit that didn't fit, likely bought for this occasion. Next to him was the city attorney, Eleanor Sterling, no relation to David, though they were professional rivals, and the union attorney, Frank D'Amico. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, her fingers hovering over the stenography machine. "State your name for the record," David Sterling said, not even looking at O'Connor. "Officer Kyle Patrick O'Connor." "Former officer," David corrected. O'Connor had been stripped of his badge pending the hearing, currently on unpaid suspension. "I am still an officer until the board says otherwise," O'Connor snapped. "Noted." David smiled. It was a predator's smile. "Mr. O'Connor, walk us through the events of Sunday, November 12th. O'Connor cleared his throat. He had rehearsed this. D'Amico had drilled him for hours. Stick to the script. Qualified immunity. Reasonable suspicion. Furtive movements. "I was on patrol," O'Connor began, his voice steadying. "I observed a subject, the plaintiff, acting suspiciously in the spice aisle. He was looking around nervously. He appeared to be concealing an item." "Concealing?" David asked. "How? He moved an item from the cart to his pocket. I believed it was theft. And when you confronted him, he became belligerent. He raised his voice. He refused to comply with my lawful orders to stop. So you arrested him." "Yes, for retail theft and resisting." David Sterling paused. He picked up a piece of paper. "Mr. O'Connor, are you familiar with the Chicago Police Department's General Order G02-02 regarding Terry stops and reasonable suspicion?" "Yes," O'Connor said. "The order states that reasonable suspicion must be based on specific, articulable facts. Not hunches, not vibes, facts." "What was the specific fact?" "I saw him put the vanilla in his pocket," O'Connor insisted. "Did you—" David pressed a button on a remote. A large monitor on the wall flickered to life. It was the store security footage, high definition. "This is camera 4. David narrated. Here is Judge Washington. Here is the cart. Watch his hands." On the screen. Samuel picked up the bottle. He moved it, but he didn't move it to his pocket. He moved it to the upper basket of the cart. It was clear as day. His hand never went near his coat pocket. The video contradicts your sworn statement. Mr. O'Connor, David said softly. From my angle, it looked like a pocket. O'Connor stammered. The angle was bad. Let's talk about the angle. Judge Washington spoke up. The room froze. The plaintiff rarely spoke during these parts, usually leaving it to the lawyer, but Samuel leaned forward. Mr. O'Connor, Samuel said. You were standing at the end of the aisle. The distance was 20 feet. You have 20/20 vision, correct? It's a requirement for the force. Yes. So you saw me move a bright white box into a metal basket. You didn't see a pocket. You saw a black man handling merchandise, and you decided it was theft. That's not true. I'm not a racist, O'Connor shouted, standing up. I followed protocol. Sit down, D'Amico hissed, pulling O'Connor back into his chair. David Sterling wasn't done. We have the body cam footage, Mr. O'Connor, but we also have something else. We have the audio from your patrol car's internal dash system. You know, the one that records the 30 seconds before the lights are activated. O'Connor went pale. He didn't know that system recorded audio inside the cabin. We enhanced the audio, David said. Would you like to hear what you said to yourself while you were sitting in the car, watching Judge Washington walk into the store? O'Connor stared at the table. He couldn't breathe. He tried to remember. What had he said? He had been angry. He had been listening to a podcast about urban decay. David played the clip. Static. Then, O'Connor's voice, muffled but audible. Look at this guy. Burberry coat. Probably paid for it with EBT, walking in there like he owns the place. I bet he slipped something. They always do. The silence in the conference room was absolute. They always do. David repeated the words. Who is they? Mr. O'Connor. O'Connor didn't answer. He couldn't. Is they the elderly? David asked. Is they people in trench coats? Or is they black men? I didn't mean it like that, O'Connor whispered. You profiled him before he even picked up a shopping cart. David slammed his hand on the table. You decided he was a criminal because of the color of his skin and the quality of his coat. You fabricated the furtive movement to justify your bias. And then, when you were proven wrong by the receipt, you assaulted a 74-year-old man to cover up your mistake. Eleanor Sterling, the city attorney, closed her folder. She looked at D'Amico. She looked at O'Connor with pure disgust. She knew the case was over. If this went to a jury, with that audio tape, the jury would give Washington the key to the city. We need a recess, Eleanor said quietly. No recess, Judge Washington said. He stood up. The pain in his shoulder flared, but he ignored it. Mr. O'Connor, Washington said, looking down at the broken young man, you took an oath to serve and protect. You served your ego, and you protected your prejudice. Washington turned to the city attorney. You offered $500,000. That was an insult. Not to me, but to the Constitution. What do you want, Judge Washington? Eleanor asked wearily. I want $1.3 million, Washington said firmly. $100,000 for every year I served on the bench. And I want it to come out of the police pension fund, not the general taxpayer fund. I want his fellow officers to know exactly what his racism cost them. That's unprecedented, Eleanor stammered. We can't touch the pension fund. Then find a way, Washington said. Or we go to trial on Monday. and I will play that tape for the jury, and I will ask for 10 million. He turned to O'Connor. And as for you, young man, you are going to resign. Today, you will surrender your badge. You will surrender your gun. And you will write a letter of apology to the staff at Whitmore's Gourmet Market for disrupting their business. O'Connor looked up, tears in his eyes. I can't lose my job. It's all I have. You should have thought of that, Washington said, before you broke my arm. Washington signaled to his son and his lawyer. We're done here. They walked out of the conference room, leaving O'Connor sitting in the wreckage of his life. The settlement of $1.3 million was paid by the city of Chicago 3 weeks later. It was the largest pretrial settlement for a single plaintiff in the history of the Police Misconduct Division for a non-lethal incident. The headlines were brutal. The Chicago Sun-Times ran the front page, "The Price of Prejudice. City pays $1.3 million for cop's vanilla mistake." But for Officer Kyle O'Connor, the check was just the beginning of the end. The audio recording of him muttering, "They always do," destroyed him. The Fraternal Order of Police, usually staunch defenders of their own, cut him loose. He was too toxic. He was fired with cause, stripping him of his pension and barring him from ever working in law enforcement in the state of Illinois again. His girlfriend, a nurse at Mercy Hospital who had defended him initially, left him 2 days after the deposition. She couldn't reconcile the man she loved with the voice on that tape. Kyle O'Connor was alone. He moved into a basement studio in a rougher part of town, ironically, a neighborhood he used to patrol with disdain. He took a job as a night security guard at a warehouse, making $15 an hour. The power he had craved, the badge he had hidden behind, it was all gone. He spent his nights drinking cheap whiskey and stewing in bitterness. He blamed the system. He blamed the media. But mostly, he blamed Samuel Washington. 6 months passed. On a rainy Tuesday in November, almost exactly 1 year after the incident at Whitmore's, Kyle O'Connor was driving home from a shift. He was tired. He had had a few drinks before getting behind the wheel to take the edge off. He ran a red light on Western Avenue and T-boned a delivery van. Nobody was seriously hurt, but O'Connor was wasted. When the responding officers arrived, O'Connor tried to pull the Brotherhood card. "I'm one of you," he slurred, leaning against his wrecked sedan. "I was Gold Coast, 18th District." The young officer, looking at his license, shook his head. "You're Kyle O'Connor, the guy who assaulted the judge. That was a setup." O'Connor shouted, "You gotta let me go. Professional courtesy." "There's no courtesy for you," the officer said coldly. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." O'Connor was arrested for DUI and reckless driving. The karma hit 2 days later at the arraignment. O'Connor stood in courtroom 302 at the Criminal Courts Building on 26th and California. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, looking haggard and broken. His public defender was a frantic, overworked woman who barely knew his name. "All rise," the bailiff announced. O'Connor looked up, expecting Judge Hernandez, who was usually on the rotation for traffic court, but the door behind the bench opened, and out walked a man with silver hair and a robe that seemed to swallow the light. He moved slowly, favoring his left shoulder, which still had a slight stiffness to it. It was the Honorable Samuel T. Washington. O'Connor's knees buckled. He grabbed the table for support. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Judge Washington sat down. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the docket. Then he looked down at the defendant. The courtroom went silent. The prosecutor, who knew exactly who both men were, held his breath. Case number 24, CR 0992. Washington read in his deep, rumbling baritone. People of the state of Illinois versus Kyle Patrick O'Connor. Washington paused. He looked O'Connor dead in the eye. There was no anger in his face, only a profound, terrifying pity. Your Honor, the public defender squeaked. We request a recusal. Given the history between the defendant and the court. Washington leaned back. Counselor, I am a visiting judge today, filling in for Judge Hernandez, who is ill. I have reviewed the conflict of interest statutes. I am capable of being impartial. However, if the defendant feels he cannot receive a fair trial, he may request a transfer, but that will delay his bail hearing by 3 weeks. O'Connor looked at the judge. 3 weeks in county jail. He couldn't survive that. He would be eaten alive. No, O'Connor croaked. No transfer. I want to get it over with. Very well, Washington said. The charge is driving under the influence and reckless driving. How do you plead guilty? O'Connor whispered. Speak up, Mr. O'Connor, Washington said. The court reporter needs to hear you. Guilty, Your Honor, O'Connor shouted, tears streaming down his face. Washington nodded. He picked up the file. Mr. O'Connor, Washington began. A year ago, you stood in a grocery store and judged me. You decided, based on nothing but your own prejudice, that I was a criminal. You took away my dignity. You took away the use of my arm. O'Connor sobbed. Today, the roles are reversed, Washington continued. I have the power. You have none. I could throw the book at you. I could give you the maximum sentence of 364 days in jail for the DUI and another 6 months for the reckless driving. I could bury you, just as you tried to bury me. The silence in the room was heavy. But, Washington said, his voice softening, I'm a man of the law, and the law is not a weapon for vengeance. It is a tool for justice. Washington picked up his gavel. I sentence you to 2 years of probation. You will attend mandatory alcohol counseling. You will complete 500 hours of community service. O'Connor looked up, stunned. No jail time, and Washington added, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. That community service will be performed at the Greater Chicago Food Depository. You will spend your weekends packing groceries for the elderly and the needy. You will learn the value of food. You will learn to serve the people you once looked down upon. Washington raised the gavel. And Mr. O'Connor, if I hear you have treated a single person with disrespect, if I hear you have judged a single soul by the color of their skin or the clothes on their back, I will revoke your probation and send you to prison for the maximum term. Do you understand? Yes. O'Connor wept. Yes, sir, thank you. Thank you. Don't thank me, Washington said, bringing the gavel down with a sharp crack. Thank the justice system you tried so hard to break. Washington stood up and walked out. He didn't look back. As O'Connor was led away to be processed, he realized the truth. Judge Washington hadn't just beaten him, he had saved him. He had given him a chance to be a human being again. And in the end, that was the hardest punishment of all the mercy he didn't deserve. And there you have it. The man who thought he was the law found out the hard way that true justice is blind, but it sees everything. Officer O'Connor lost his badge, his pride, and his career. But Judge Washington walked away with $1.3 million and the last laugh. It's a powerful reminder. Never judge a book by its cover. And definitely don't judge a man by his grocery list. If this story fired you up, make sure to smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were the judge? Would you have sent him to jail or shown him mercy? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story of instant karma. Stay safe, stay kind, and remember, the truth always wins. See you in the next one.